Good morning. I'm very happy to have a very distinguished panel of service provider executives. I'm going to let them do most of the talking, including I'm going to let them introduce themselves as they answer my first question. The title of this panel, I think, contains most of the buzzwords we're all using. Orchestrated application-driven services across a global ecosystem of automated networks. I think I got most of those in there. Actually, Stan did. He wrote the name of the title. But I think everybody can agree that those are all worthy goals that everybody's pushing toward across the industry. And so I don't think the question is, do we want that to happen? I think everybody agrees on that. But the first question I'm asking the panel to address is, what does the industry together, since we're here in this room together, need to solve in order to make that happen, that ultimate goal? And how do you think the telecom industry arrives at that solution? And Adam, since you fled to the end, you get to go first. So introduce yourself and then answer the question.
All right. So Adam Saenger. I have responsibility at CenturyLink for our networking solutions. And I believe it's really solving for the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps of automation and application driven. It starts with the people, process, the platforms, and the portfolio. All too often, we solve for fit-for-purpose elements of our business. And that causes an interoperability issue. And solving for interoperability without components working together, whether it's service provider to service provider, or network function to network function, or access technology to access technology, or business application to network application, automation and that orchestration seems to falter.
Okay.
So we need to come together as an industry, solving for each of those disparate components as one.
Okay, sadly, I don't think anybody can argue with that, but Kyle will give you a chance to maybe add to it.
Yeah, so, well, first, it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Malady. I'm the acting CTO at Verizon. I guess the way I'd think about this is, well, I've been around for a long time, so I've seen patterns in the industry over time. So I think when I started in wireless, there was a service called Follow Me Roaming. And if you remember, you had to dial codes to go find somebody if they were in another state or something. That was tough. But the industry, over time, usually develops standards. It's a very standards-driven industry. And then it takes people to come together to figure out, all right, how are we going to implement those standards and how are we going to ensure interoperability across whatever service it is voice, data, et cetera. And I think MEF is an outcropping of like-minded people coming together to figure out how do we have these services work in different networks. So I think the same thing's going to continue moving forward. There'll be innovation that happens. Usually people look for innovation and try and leverage it for themselves, but then they feel that rising tide floats all the boats, and people start working together and they advance it. So that's why I see that pattern time and time again. I would assume it'll still go.
Are you seeing it happen now? Are you seeing the industry come together, and do you think in an effective way?
You know, I think for certain areas, yes, and others, no. You know, in certain networks, I mean, Ethernet was a good example of it. We were just kind of all doing our own thing, and it became difficult. And people got together, and it's a better ecosystem now. And I see there's some areas that are early on. I think 5G is one that is going to take some work as we go forward.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, John.
Yeah, so JP Hemingway, the CEO for SES Networks, and I guess the introduction to the company, if you don't know them, I'll explain our angle on this, is that we're a service provider that happens to be over satellite infrastructure. And for years, I think, satellite has been thought of the point of last resort, the complex, expensive thing you need to get to, the last few megabits to the last few hundred sites. And really what we're doing is taking satellite mainstream. And the ways you do that is you make it standardized, which is why we're one of the only satellite companies to be MEF certified. But to go truly standardized, you've got to be automated. I think the challenge that we have is making sure that all the things that we have to take care of in the satellite market, the orchestration, the automation that needs to happen, applies not only to terrestrial networks, but flows through in a seamless way into both terrestrial, fiber, microwave, whatever it's going to be, but of course, including satellite. So we've moved the SLAs right down to very close to fiber. So you're thinking gigabits, not megabits. But to solve that automation is fundamentally key. And maybe one example I would give, satellite serves a particular market called mobility. These things move, whether it's by land, by sea, by air. So you think about a static SDN map that people deal with in terrestrial world. We've now got things that move, in some cases satellites that move, and coordinating that extra dimension of complexity is something that we need to make sure that the standards can really accommodate and evolve towards. So really the challenges I see is making sure that it's not just thinking about terrestrial, it's rolling across other forms, obviously satellite being our focus, but also we have some nuances that need to be considered in the standards bodies.
Okay, good point. Okay, so you're batting clean up here.
Marc Halbfinger, PCCW Global. And I guess for the purpose of this discussion, probably helpful to mention that last year we acquired Console Connect, which focuses also on automating, orchestrating, and assuring interoperability amongst service providers and clouds.
Okay.
And in that regard, but in answer to your question, I think 3 years ago I stood up here and said how important it was first that the OSS and BSS environments collapse into one, that we start to expose the back end to the front end. That was what the end user was requiring from us as network-based service providers. And then last year, Nan asked me, where do I think the challenges are? And I think the primary message was not so much the excellent work that was happening in MEF around technical interconnects for interoperability, but more around what's happening amongst us as a service provider community around establishing the commercial tenets for interoperability.
Remember that, yeah.
And I think that in the last year, first of all, MEF has caught on to that. And it's exciting to see, first of all, what's happening in the commercial attributes side of MEF. Second, there's work that's gone on together with Global Leaders Forum to do some proofs of concept around blockchain-based settlement. You can see a few proofs of concept around that. One of them we're involved with. And I think that the back end, from a commercial point of view, is now starting to find its feet. The question is, will we be able to create spec that makes sense, not just technically, but also commercially, and that they'll be able to integrate together?
Okay, I want to come back to you on blockchain. I thought there was a very interesting proof of concept. I would recommend everybody check that one out. But first, I'm going to start, and we're going to talk challenges right up front. You've all each addressed some of them. But if you could, at this point, identify the one challenge that you're going to definitely tackle. And Kyle, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I'm actually going to go more internal to my own. And I think Jan brought this up before, internal to my own company. And it's when we're automating and orchestrating in a cloud. It's different than how we used to run the business, and I think the system integrator role. He was mentioning it before, where there's different elements in the solution, and everybody's pointing at each other, and sometimes that'll end up resulting in an outage that either takes too long to fix or take too long to understand what happened, and that's something that we're working really hard on right now to make sure that we orchestrate that very well, and people know what they're supposed to be doing, and we integrate systems so that we can really understand how they work. We can characterize at a very deep level how they work, and whenever something goes wrong, the right people are working on it. So we're spending a lot of time really optimizing how we do VNFs and orchestrate things in the cloud.
And does that happen both for your end customers and also for your wholesale customers in the same way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have the platform. We just want to run it. We take our reliability of the network very seriously, and we want to make sure we have 100% uptime. But this is a different way of running a network than we have in the past, and we're learning a little bit. But in the end, it is a lot more flexible, and all of those things that we saw up on the board before are absolutely possible. So we keep at it.
Okay. All right, Marc, I'm going to come to you to hop around here. Do you think at this point that it's still commercial challenge, or the commercial agreements that are the big challenge, or what else would you say?
Well, it depends on the size of the network and what each service provider is trying to achieve. And also, I think we have to recognize the fact that clouds, quite frankly, with a lot of the service offerings that they're providing, are simply bypassing going directly to the end user.
Okay.
Question in my mind whether commercial frameworks in a 5G-based environment, when we move cloud to the edge, what is the distribution going to look like? What will be the commercial relationships between us, the network-based service provider, and the cloud? Will we try and compete with them, or will we try and aggregate? Will they facilitate it? So I think it's still a challenge, first of all, understanding who's in charge of the end user, for what services, under what conditions. And then in what situations do we, as networks or clouds, want to interface with one another? Technically, for instance, I may work with JP to coordinate extended C-band frequencies in Hong Kong around SES capabilities in order to deliver 5G.
Okay.
But the commercial relationships between us still need to be worked out as well. And so if we're going to be creating this global ubiquity that Eric was mentioning with the 4-to-1 environment, we're really going to have to be working on all the nuances of all the commercial elements, including the basics of how you handle IoT interoperability at a commercial level.
Okay, well, I'm not going to get too deep into IoT interoperability. I think it's a little bit beyond our scope. But I do want to ask, before we go on, for each of you, if you want to address one of the issues you just raised, which is the notion of how do you cooperate with cloud players at the edge? If your clouds are moving closer to the edge, you start banging into their clouds. What does that infrastructure look like?
Sure. I mean, so we just signed a partnership with IBM, which we thought was a particularly important one for us to do. Again, we're trying to open up markets for the cloud players to get very, very focused on the developed markets. So everyone wants to have the latest IBM cloud application or big data application in North America, as an example. Obviously, what we specialize in doing is how do you deliver that to businesses across the entire planet with the reach that a satellite operator can do. And what we really had to try and do is we can learn so much from how they've automated their own cloud architectures. We need to be able to extend their architectures from their data centers all the way through the connectivity that we provide over satellite. So learning from IBM about how they want to, A, automate and operate their network, but also sorting through some of the commercial discussions that we need to have is how are those licenses sold? Are we part of that license value chain? Do we bring in extensions to our network, or we are extending other people's networks like those around me? There's an awful lot of commercial work to be done around how these things sit together on a commercial basis.
Okay, I'm starting to get a headache. This sounds really complicated. But let me ask the two of you, because you're both actively building out edge cloud infrastructures. How do you see those coming together with the existing? And Adam, you can tackle it first if you want. How do you see that coming together with the existing cloud players? And where does all that, again, on a commercial basis, hook up?
It's in direct partnership with the cloud providers. I want to tackle something that Marc mentioned and Kyle, which is the bringing together of the technical orchestration with the commercial services relationships. Mm-hmm. Those have to be solved for together. And if we have a long duration of getting to a viable commercial terms agreement, and then we orchestrate quickly on the back end, there's a disconnect there. So we need to bring those together, but we have to focus up front. Now, to your question on cloud, it's the cloudification of the network, and the cloudification of the network should bring us all together in providing the cloud functions nearest where customers want to do business. And so performance matters. And in partnership with these cloud resources, we have to get much more adaptable as an industry and working with them. And I say them, it's us, right? It's the cloud partners and network partners. And so that's one of the reasons why CenturyLink is investing so heavily. We have a capability called Cloud Application Manager. Mm-hmm. That is going to become a significant part of our multi-service management tool set that we expose to customers, because the way customers interact with the applications in those cloud environments, they expect the network to be managed in a very similar way. So that'll be that seamless interface.
Coming to Marc's point, I think this was one of the points he was making, unless I'm reading too much into it. There's also the question, though, of who owns that customer. Is the customer looking at, okay, you're our network and they're our cloud? Or are they looking at, you're part of our cloud and they're part of our cloud? What do you think, Kyle?
I mean, if I look at it from an edge compute scenario, I mean, what we're doing is we're really looking at the technology. We've set up labs and we're partnering with people, and we're kicking the tires on the technology so we can understand what's possible. From that will flow, okay, what do we think are the viable business models for edge compute? And then that would ultimately lead into questions about interoperability and the like. But another angle besides interoperability is also the developer ecosystems that go along with providing applications above a certain layer. And that's going to be certainly an important consideration when you're thinking about how you're going to deploy an edge compute platform.
So you just added more complexity. You brought the developer community into it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're just not going to make anything simple for me up here, are you? Okay, well, so JP, from your standpoint, I mean, would you agree with what they've said? And
Yeah, and I wish I could make it simple for you, Carol, as well. But unfortunately, it's even going to depend on the kind of end customers that we're serving. If you focus on the enterprise market for now, some of the relationships we have, I mentioned IBM before, if we are the connectivity partner to all of the endpoints of that particular customer, it makes sense that we own the edge compute at the end of our connection, and therefore we're hosting on behalf of IBM something closer to the edge. However, a lot of those multinationals that we serve may have a piece of all of our technology, so fiber connected or satellite connected. So really, who owns the end customer when some of those A to Z ends are a combination of multiple infrastructures? So it's going to take a three-way conversation in many cases to serve those enterprise endpoints. So again, I wish I could make it simpler. I've probably just added another layer of complexity.
Okay, so Marc, circling back to you since you opened this can of worms. In terms of the commercial agreements, is it clear, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this, is it clear that the telecom industry has a structure for how those commercial agreements are going to evolve? Is that existing structure out there today? Is MEF part of it? And if you're going to have these more complex commercial arrangements and agreements, I'm assuming you don't want those to be one-offs. Maybe you do, I don't know. Maybe that's a point of differentiation.
I think the service provider industry itself has become a bit disaggregated, for lack of a better word. The clouds are driving independent ecosystems,
Okay.
each of them thinking in their own way in terms of how they want to own the end user. Less focused on what has been traditionally the winning game for all of us as a collective service provider community, and use the word here, global ecosystem, right, on the panel, is that we've always been willing to interoperate from the moment. As a matter of fact, Verizon, CenturyLink, and AT&T will be willing to terminate traffic on each other's network on a wholesale basis. And yet, if you were to want to make a FaceTime call to WhatsApp, it doesn't quite fly, right?
Oh, good point.
You can't even contact from Facebook Messenger to WhatsApp, even though they're owned by the same environment, arguably, right? So, and then how are we supposed to interoperate that from a wholesale point of view? So if one part of the applications world is going to be going independently and not take part in this environment here, then the only thing that we can do at this point, in my view, is to continue our drive to enable orchestrated application-driven services through the global ecosystem, interoperated. The title's brilliant. And to make sure that we go there. But we need to create a platform in some way that will eventually also attract the independent ecosystems to our environment. We have to make it meaningful for them, whether on a retail or a wholesale basis.
And how do you create that platform?
I think that we have, what we're doing here technically and operationally in terms of creating all of this spec and making sure that we're much more agile and driving, that's been step one. So effectively as an industry to reorganize each and every one of our companies to be software driven, more agile, to deliver services as quickly as possible. Now the back end has to be automated as well. And the interoperability has to be automated, and that's why I referenced the blockchain before. Because I think that may be possibly one tool that we'll be able to deploy. Okay,
I am going to come back to blockchain, I promise. But just a quick reaction. Adam, would you agree with what he just said?
I would. It's back to we as an industry have to evolve across our people, how we operate, the processes in which we operate, the platforms or the systems construct. Each one of those elements have to be solved for, and if you solve for one, we don't have the level of agility that the enterprise requires, because they are going through this massive cloud, call it a digital transformation. And for the communications industry, the cloud industry, to participate in that and effectively drive it, we have to fire on each of those four cylinders.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to finally get back to blockchain, and then we're going to talk 5G a little bit too. But let's talk blockchain. You clearly seem to be pretty much a proponent of using that technology. It's just like, is it basically a private blockchain? And don't ask me to understand blockchain. I'm going to retire before I have to do that. So, but just talking about it in general sense, explain to me a little bit about how you see that working and the potential it has as a platform.
I'm not an expert myself, I'll be honest with you. I'm a proponent, and I'm a proponent not necessarily of one technology or another. I'm a proponent simply of moving forward as quickly as possible with as much velocity as possible. One thing I can tell you is that our back office deals with so much activity on a manual basis, dispute management resolution, and all the exciting things that we heard this morning from the different service providers about moving the network forward. Quite honestly, you heard from extremely large networks, mostly based here in the United States and mostly focused from their back end downstream to their own retail end users, without dealing with some of the back end complexities necessary to do in order to create this interoperability. And if we're being very exciting and agile on the front end, but we're not tackling the back end, we'll be disaggregated from others. And so we saw blockchain within the community of what's called the Global Leaders Forum, which I think everyone here actually is a part of, perhaps with the exception of SES, to see whether blockchain can be an inter-carrier capable technology that would facilitate a common trust where settlement between service providers would happen in single blockchains, but then published to an industry-wide public blockchain with a single layer of trust that would be able to automate. And everything that we saw in the last few presentations about how things are moving from months to minutes, so too the back-end settlement process would be able to do that. And once you're able to do that, then you're able to add dynamism in terms of the types of products and services that are being offered, and not just within your own network, but within the interoperable application-driven services automated environment. Again, it's a driver to the topic.
And maybe the reason we're interested in looking at blockchain, again, not an expert, but I understand the basic principles of this, but in terms of a sort of automated and independent ledger, there's 3 applications that may be relatively unique to the satellite world. I mean, we intend certainly, and I'm sure we all do, to be part of the industrial IoT, which is going to have an awful lot of micro transactions that need some way to be highly automated, and that's one area we're interested in. The second one is, we believe, to get global coverage for things like the aviation market. Some of us do, some of us don't want to be connected to an aircraft all the time, but ultimately the amount of demand is going through the roof. So how do we as operators allow roaming, just like we do on cell phones across mobile networks, how do we allow roaming across satellite networks when aircraft are flying around the world? Again, the amount of microtransactions, if we were coming up with mobile phone roaming today with a clean sheet, we might be looking at something like blockchain as an enabling technology. And the third one is, we sometimes are in very rural areas, and they're typically going towards cashless societies. So we see a lot of mobile banking already happening in parts of developing Africa, as an example. So does blockchain have a role in that? Maybe. So they're the sort of 3 use cases we're looking at.
Interesting. Okay. All right, Kyle.
That's exactly how we're thinking about it. If you look at the historical way of how you do regular types of roaming in wireless technology, and then all the back office to clear all that is expensive. And blockchain really gives you technology that can really clear that out and make it much cheaper. So you can make IoT type applications much more profitable. And then actually we're looking at ways in our own finance department, et cetera, to figure out how we can leverage it to even make our operations a little smoother. So.
No kidding. Okay. Now, is this again? I'm not the blockchain expert, but is this like? Are there private blockchains and public blockchain, or how does that work?
Let me just offer just one thing, perhaps to simplify from a Q&A point of view, from a commercial perspective, because I only get it at a simple level myself. But if we have 2 service providers, let's say CenturyLink and Verizon, who want to exchange any type of service between them on a wholesale or retail level. At the moment, there's a physical contract that's signed between 2 representatives, and then there are people in the back office together with each independent set of systems that will measure whatever component of traffic and value that's set in that written contract. Now take the written contract, and both parties agree to put that written contract into code and to quantify what the dispute parameters may be. And once those 2 agree, and the industry agrees around that on a wider sense, and you take those written contracts and simply code them, you facilitate automation. And that can happen internally in an organization, it can happen in an industry environment, provided everyone will agree the basic parameters. That's why an environment like MEF is so critical in order to develop those things forward.
And therein lies the opportunity then for potentially blockchain to be a technology that allows us to have more dynamic services across global networks. Orchestration across Verizon's network, CenturyLink's network, PCCW, inter-service provider here.
Okay. All right. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about 5G. We've talked a lot about, and this was discussed earlier today, I think Josh Goodell talked about it, and a couple other folks as well. The notion is once you start building on a 5G network and putting many more endpoints out there, and I know IoT is a whole different endpoint story, but just for the 5G infrastructure and for that to go forward, what does that do in terms of the additional challenge it presents to this orchestrated global ecosystem? So Kyle, I'm going to start with you there. What challenges do you see to get this ready to support a true 5G rollout?
I don't see 5G being a problem in this regard. I think it's actually an opportunity because we will be bringing all new sort of technology to the game as we deploy our 5G networks.
Okay.
And I actually think it's going to be, because it's being thought of as a network that will be highly automated from day one. So in my perspective, I see it's actually an opportunity, not a big problem.
So then there's the
I have a bigger problem automating old things. So
okay.
I think I still might have Alexander Graham Bell's phone in my network somewhere, but there's a lot of old gear in there.
Okay.
And coming up with solutions to automate those as best you can, I find is more challenging than the new stuff.
Okay, so then the challenge is, as you're introducing the new thing, which is automated, how do you continue to find better ways of automating the stuff that's still going to be around for a while?
Right. So
Okay.
yep. So in that regard, we have we probably 7-8 years ago, we spun up a group of people to really data scientists, just to dig into our networks and be able to characterize them at a very, very deep level and understand cause of effect. If something happened on, say, some piece of gear that on the optical layer, and how it might affect another piece of gear up in up in IP, and understand the correlations and be able to kind of watch that, measure it, see what normal is, and then find weak signals. So that's how we've been able to, we've gotten better and better and better at that, to the point now in many of my networks, I can tell if something's going to break with a high degree of confidence before it actually does.
Now, is that based on machine learning?
It is. So
Okay.
we use a lot of machine learning techniques. Yahoo became part of Verizon a while ago. They have a lot of great data scientists and AI people. We've brought them in to help us, and that's been really fantastic, because we've been able to learn from their point of view, from where they grew up as web scale, and from where we grew up on a network, and getting those folks together and what they've come up with is pretty astounding. But for me, my whole thing is we want customers to have the best possible service, and if I can possibly predict something's going to go wrong before it actually does, that gives us good opportunity to serve the customer well. So we
Okay.
continue on that journey. There's a lot to do. It's big networks, but we're seeing a lot of good benefit from this.
Okay, all right, so the other panelists, you also see, and I know in some cases you're not offering direct 5G service, but you're going to be offering the infrastructure, and wireless service is only wireless until it hits the network. So would you agree with that this is a great opportunity and not a challenge?
I mean, certainly for us, obviously, we don't offer, direct 5G services to the end customer. We absolutely are looking to be a predominant piece of backhaul with the densification needed. And let's face it, we don't want 5G just to be in pockets of cities. We want it to be everywhere that you can get to. So we're certainly involved in a lot of trials, tests, proof of concepts right now to show how satellite can be one of the methods to deliver content to the very edge of network, so you can play out with low latency from the edge to the end users. I think what it's driving my part of the industry to look into is look at how do we manage edge compute as part of a satellite network that probably wasn't needed before.
Okay.
So it's driving us to integrate that with our end equipment that probably wasn't really thinking about that a year ago. So it's driving a bit more technology innovation.
Okay. All right, Adam?
So we see CenturyLink sees 5G actually both as an opportunity and a threat, quite frankly, because we're not in the wireless space. But
As a broadband access method? As a threat to-
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, as a means for customers to buy, leverage, and interact with their network components, wireless is a key aspect of that, and we feel that 5G can be a delivery mechanism to support their primary and backup network connectivity needs. I do want to tack on to something that Kyle has mentioned, which is data, right? The ability to collect data, and data drives all of our businesses, and we all go through the data cycle. We acquire the data, we analyze the data, and we act. That in and of itself isn't the differentiator. It's what we do with it and the speed at which we go through that process, which is going to be the differentiator for any customer in any industry. And so that's, Kyle keyed in on a way that Verizon is using that. CenturyLink is also using those capabilities for identification of potential threats to the network, whether it's a security threat, it's a maintenance threat, but also opportunities to evolve their networks based upon how their resources are moving across their network, whether it's in a public cloud environment, private cloud environment, hybrid environment, to optimize that traffic flow.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and this is one of my favorite questions just because it's something I've been writing a lot about lately. As I talk, and I do talk mostly to larger network operators, I do talk to some mid-sized and a few smaller ones, but mostly to larger network operators, and finding more and more of them are doing what Kyle was just describing Verizon is doing, which is developing their own internal teams that develop their own software, doing their own data scientists, bringing that in internal. I know CenturyLink has done quite a bit of this, and in some cases developing what it used to rely on vendors to develop for them. Is this a trend that you guys agree with or that you see? And if so, what do you think the impact is? Does it wind up with more differentiation of service? Does it make things easier when you talk about then cooperating together? Does it make it harder? What do you think the impact is? And you guys can go first if you want to, because I know you're both doing this.
Yeah, I would say it depends on how it's rolled out, right? I mean, it can, if done so in a stovepipe way, a standalone application way, it can make things much more complex. And honestly, I think that's what's gotten the industry into the position that it is today, and trying to solutionize business, right? Applications and network. So the adaptability of software, yeah, we're developing a lot of the software capabilities internal to help bridge our own applications, and the applications could be network functions, physical functions, virtual functions, security function, cloud capabilities.
Well, you did your own orchestrator too, didn't you?
We have, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to look to continue to build on that orchestrator, because customers don't just buy one particular function. They buy across those functional categories, if you will. So we felt it best to build that orchestrator, that multi-service management capabilities to help customers manage their business so that we can manage their network.
I think I look at it, we tend to make decisions based on, it's not really even competitive advantage. If somebody's looking at my network end to end and they really understand it deeply, I want those people to be a part of my organization, because I think they can be valuable to me, not only in making sure the network runs well, but they can also think about how they can apply other technologies to do something interesting and are better for our customers. And then there's other things that are kind of more commodity, and you know what? It's not really that big a point of differentiation to me. It's probably more a point of, is it more cost effective or something? In that case, I'd use somebody from the outside. So
Okay.
it depends on what the kind of what function we're talking about.
Are there vendors that have that deep understanding of your network, or is that always going to be an internal process?
I think from an end-to-end perspective, I want to have the most deep understanding of the network than anybody. I think a lot of my vendors have a very good understanding of it, and an extremely good understanding of what their particular either VNF function might be or PNF function may be. But from an end-to-end perspective, I think our people need to understand that the best.
Okay. JP, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously not the same scale as some of my colleagues on the stage here, but even to a couple of thousand person organization, we found ourselves hiring more software engineers than many other things. And I think out of necessity, we found ourselves building our own even SDN controllers at one point, because some of the standardization that has happened very well at the IP, Ethernet, and even the optical layer hasn't yet happened, or is just happening in the sort of the RF satellite space, which is our underlying transport.
Okay,
So
okay.
out of necessity we did that, and then we thought there was some real nuances to what we were doing. Back to that example, we'd got satellites that literally move their beams, and in some cases were following ships around the ocean, and the ships were moving around. So managing that level of dynamic behavior was something we felt we should create and own ourselves. But ultimately, when we do that at scale, we think those building blocks are better served by other people. So we're delivering a lot of the open standards work that's out there. And we will bring in the integration specialism around the nuances of what our network and our satellites and our operations need to have. So I think a lot less from grounds up development, more into using the building blocks of standards bodies and standards open source software. But then we still need to own that low level IP around how we translate the nuances of what we deliver to our end customers.
To your specific satellite needs. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Marc.
Well, maybe let me just address a few themes that we're all feeling globally. Number one is a shift from hardware-based infrastructure to software-based
absolutely.
environments. Second, open source, which is just blowing open the development of code and the accessibility of any service provider to get to code in order to facilitate user and internal requirements. Third is many organizations, as a result of the software boom, moving to agile type behavior. All of that is creating an environment which is perhaps disaggregating the traditional food chain that service providers had with vendors. And I think the vendors themselves are starting to feel that, and they too are starting to change their commercial model. The interaction that our parent company, HKT, the domestic ICT service provider in Hong Kong, has with Huawei at the moment is quite unique, where they're very familiar with what we do and where there's cooperation arrangements to the point where the value chains and the commercial relationships are not the traditional service provider-vendor relationship structure.
What are they?
I think that it's one where Huawei is willing to put skin in the game and actually to invest downstream in what a service provider is doing to make sure that they're enjoying value. And we've seen that, I think, at least Chinese service providers in general, the mix of what's happening in mainland China, in part perhaps driven by the government, where you're seeing clouds now taking ownership positions in large service providers. China Unicom today is also owned in part by Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent. And that's being driven through there, and you see a vendor, an IT vendor that would be comparable in the West to Amdocs or Netcracker, a company called Asia Info, who's actually part and parcel of what China Mobile is doing. And so I think that the models that we're seeing out of Asia are perhaps a little bit more directed regulation, but at the same time lighter touch, allowing service providers to integrate with clouds, to integrate with what would have been the traditional vendors, and to move forward much more aggressively in this technology shift. That's
an interesting perspective. Do you think it does help the overall market there develop more rapidly?
I'm sure it's a mix of things. For lack of, I don't want to put my finger on one issue or not, if it's political or if it's technological or whatever, or just the race in Asia perhaps a little bit more rapid. But at the moment, the take-up in Asia of new technology all the way down to whether it's stored money value systems or the manner of automated payments for consumers in China, and all the way to 5G deployment, where in China today there's more than about 300,000 cell sites already with 5G capable. Korea, Japan as well, moving very, very, very quickly. I think the pace in Asia is a little bit quicker at the moment compared to what's happening perhaps in US and North America, US and Europe. But you know, these things shift quite rapidly.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask maybe Kyle and Adam, could you ever see that kind of a model working in North America?
You know, I guess the way, listening there, I think where I come out more, and especially when you look at Chinese networks, they're massive, and their ability to do things really quickly is very impressive. I think what we're working on now, obviously the technology, but how do you deploy such a large network and quickly? And that's why we're spending a lot of time with local cities and regulators, et cetera, trying to figure out ways that we can put the antennas up faster than may otherwise be possible. So we create these partnerships. We're trying to work with localities, but it's an awful lot of you know, just construction work that we need to do to get this technology out and so people can use it. And I think in China, that's pretty, from what I understand, pretty straightforward.
Right.
It's a little more complicated here because
where you're having to go for permits and access and rights of way and
right
things like that.
And, and getting where attach rights and all that kind of thing. So, but we understand this. We've been doing it for a long time, but that may take us a little bit longer. But we're working hard to get these networks out as quick as we possibly can.
Okay. Adam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just so therein lies, I think, further opportunity for 5G, right? To manage rapid deploy, but we also manage to. There's building moratoriums that take place here in certain geographic areas that you hit a certain date, you got to wait for 6 months, and the bottom line is our customers' business can't wait for 6 months. We have to look at alternative ways to get them up and operating.
Okay. Okay, so we have about a little over 5 minutes left, so I want to ask one last question here, and that's the role of standard organizations. Marc brought up open source as one of the influences, and I think we can all agree on that. But what role do traditional SDOs, does a group like the MEF, which I think is trying to move a little beyond the traditional SDO, and also vendors play in all this? So I don't know who wants, I'll throw it open and you can volunteer to go first. Okay.
I'll go first, that's all right.
Okay.
Watching the growth of MEF over the years has been awesome, right? It's moved from truly metro Ethernet to more of a higher layer applications-focused organization, right? We're talking about the horizontal movement of data, the vertical integration of networks, and it'll absolutely continue to play a role in the expansion of these standards to include more of a software-centric management capabilities we'll embrace that.
Okay. And I think I deserve special credit for going the entire panel without mentioning your socks. So.
They are cool.
Okay.
You gotta have fun with socks.
I echo that. I mean, it goes back to where I started with. You always need a forum as technology evolves and interoperability becomes something that you need to have. You need a forum where people can come together and hash it out and work it through as a group of like-minded individuals. And so I believe that this will continue to be a very important forum as we move forward.
And likewise, and maybe a little selfishly for the problems I'm trying to solve right now, is that the work that MEF and other bodies have done in helping the disaggregation of hardware, and whether it be layer 2, layer 3, application layer, even optical and open ROADM systems. I think that's all great. I need to see that same level of disruption happen for the satellite industry. If we're building systems that are going to connect hundreds of thousands of cloud-connected enterprises across the globe, we need to be able to see automation, price disruption, disaggregation of hardware and software, just like we've seen in, let's call it, more mainstream technologies. I need to see exactly the same thing, and I think that's a standards bodies thing, and MEF is certainly a key one, but it's also a vendor thing, and we've challenged our vendors to come back to us and said, how do you help us go on this journey? And so far, they're reacting well.
Okay. All right. Marc.
Well, first of all, the thing I like about MEF, and it shouldn't be MEF anymore, right? Metro Ethernet Forum. We're not Metro, we're not Ethernet, it's just a forum, so maybe it's multi-ecosystem forum or something like that. I don't know what
That's a good one.
to have a party around what the naming nomenclature should be. But
Everybody doesn't even say it. Some people say MEF, some people say MEF. The
Anyway,
MEF, it's like...
very impressive,
Global ecosystem
the
forum.
fact that they're able to put vendors, whether from the hardware space or the software space, service providers together to tackle different geographies around the world. Not afraid to also try and engage with other standards bodies and other forums that may be out there. I'm part of a group called GLF Global Leaders Forum in MEF, very humbly working very closely with the GLF in order to develop the commercial technical interface, doing the heavy lifting with the colleagues in the room here and making sure that that things make sense not just technically but commercially. And the more I think that MEF engages both technically and commercially, as Nan laid out earlier today, continues to engage with as many of the different ecosystems, including the clouds and the mobile operators, which sometimes are here, sometimes not, and engage with as many geographies as possible in order to track the different elements, I think then we're in a good place. And in that regard, different standards forums are doing different things. If MEF can aggregate a lot of that activity and make sure that there's a common dialogue in the continued humble way that they're doing now, I think it's fantastic.
Okay. So I think I've heard it often talk about this sort of the glue that ties things together, and certainly that's how I think in terms of APIs and things like that. Okay. We now have about 2 minutes left to get back to, I don't want to run over. We don't want to be the only thing that runs over today. So I'm going to give you each of like 30 seconds. Adam mentioned people in his very first answer, but this is one of the few panels I've been on and people haven't somehow gotten around talking about the need to reform internal cultures. So let me just say, not is there still a need for that, but are you making progress on that front? So Adam, let's start with you.
Yes, we are making progress. We need to do more. We've spent the last 45 minutes talking about looking internal to our industry, looking at the cloudification of the enterprise. We need to talk about our customers more, and our people having those conversations day in and day out. Nothing gets done without impacting people, and those can be our customers or our employees. And if you optimize both of their experiences, you will lead to a game-changing moving at the speed of the enterprise versus moving at the speed of telecom.
Okay, Kyle.
Yeah, this is something I spend most of my time on, thinking about the culture of the organization and how do you get people to embrace the new technologies and the new methods? Because let's face it, people get used to doing the way they've done things for a long time and they're good at it, and now you're moving their cheese and incenting them and getting them motivated to try something new is challenging. Not everybody makes the pivot, and that ends up being tough sometimes, but in general, if you can get most of your organization moving in the direction, they see good things happen, and that just builds upon itself. So we continue on that journey.
Okay.
It's a huge thing. I mean, the industry that I particularly represent is a very technology-driven industry. We literally have rocket scientists, right? And that's typically what they do. And we need to add to that, but obviously we're adding a lot more network technologists to it. But that's not the only answer. Having to pivot back to be, as you said, closer to the customer, be able to react to customer timelines way quicker than, satellite has also got its long multi-year programs, and that doesn't get things done quick enough. So having a greater degree of agility is a huge cultural transformation.
Okay, you got 15 seconds, Marc.
One thing we've done is first of all, organizationally from a tech point of view, is to make sure that hardware folks are working closely with the software people and then assuring that arguably that the software approach leads. Second is we've moving our entire organization, about 1,500 strong now, to a scaled agile framework. Okay. That's a big ask, and it may not be as agile as it seems, but it's an effort that we're doing in order to create a common framework for change.
Okay, terrific. Please join me in thanking the panelists.